Hello, hello?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Today's my day off. Was able to sleep in a bit, make myself a nice little breakfast. Um, Had a cigarette right before, but in this lovely 100-degree heat, I only melted a bit.
Wait,
How are you doing today?
what city are you in?
Phoenix.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that one. That city really should not exist.
Oh, don't get me started. But yeah, I'm happy to come on. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. Now, I want to get right to it. For the despite the many painted signs that I've nailed to the front of my treehouse, there are still liberals in this community. Could you tell me, who are you? What do you represent? What does the organization you represent do? And what is their historical legacy? Go.
Hello, my name is Jordan, he, him pronouns. I'm an officer and an organizer with the Industrial Workers of the World, better known as the IWW, a labor union that focuses on rank and file democracy and direct action in the workplace. Historical legacy, I gotta say, probably the most effective way of organizing the working class. They had their major upsurge in the early 20th century before getting booted by the feds. And I joined the IWW a few years ago because I believe in that dream of the one big union. I want to see all of the working class organized together in one big union.
It's a very syndicalist ambition. One single global union probably couldn't rep everyone everywhere all the time. But it could be sort of the federated head of hundreds or thousands of labor unions, which have varying goals and ambitions on an individual level, but all share, the solidarity part.
Yeah, so don't want to get like too high in the clouds today. I was kind of hoping today to come on to teach your audience a bit about the nuts and bolts when it comes to unionizing their workplace. I want everyone here to focus on their immediate workplace today, if that's all right.
Of course, and that is actually a question that I get quite often. Now, I have I have some sort of abstract intellectual knowledge of good practices for union organization, and I'm decent with the rhetoric bit. But the actual process of starting a union is complicated, difficult, and really variable, which is why, as I understand it, the IWW is, tasks itself with informing people how to get started, kicking off the process of building that one world union one step at a time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the, biggest positive of the union is like it's easy and accessible training. Like when I joined, they easily got me into training. I was able to start organizing my workplace. Real quick, before we go on, I have just a bit of disclaimer. I'm not coming here as an official representative of the union. I'm just someone who has this skills and knowledge and would like to pass them along.
No, yeah, absolutely. I completely understand. And we're delighted to have you. So, just so you know, and I'm sure you probably can figure this, you can intuit this, I really do get dozens and dozens of emails, people asking, how do I unionize this, that, the other workplace? And what I'm getting from this, and what I'm getting from statistics that I've read on the popularity of unions and on people's attitudes towards unionization in general, is that people really want them. People right now, more so than certainly my entire lifetime, maybe the past century of U.S. labor advocacy, people are really gunning for them. And in your opinion, would you agree? Like we're living in a fairly unprecedented era of labor advocacy.
Oh yeah, definitely. We haven't seen this kind of upsurge since like the early 1970s during that strike wave. And I want to come on here today to make sure that upsurge in interest is kind of used for practical means. I want to make sure that all of the workers who are interested know how to do it. So I was kind of hoping the timeline of this call would go over something we tell all workers when we first meet them. So I'm what's called an external organizer as well. And what that means is when workers come to us and are interested in unionizing their workplace, I meet with them and kind of go over the stuff we're going to be talking about today in that first meeting. So I was kind of hoping to go over a bit of ground rules first, the timeline of a union campaign and the specifics of it, and what makes the IWW unique, and why I think it's the most effective way of organizing the working class.
Please.
Real quick, for chatters, would y'all post what you do for a job or what industry you work in?
Chat.
Maybe
Hit it.
some frogs if you're a wobbly as well. What is it? What is the term for that? Hypers? I'm not entirely
Yes.
sure.
Though they know what you mean when you say frogs. Yeah, he's reading chat. Yeah. Um,
Oh,
I
that's
saw
lovely to
forklift
see.
driver. Yeah. Wait, people work in my community? Oh my god.
Yeah. I hope it's not just a bunch of unemployed Zoomers here.
Just mostly.
But yeah, so kind of first, couple of ground rules. If you are interested in unionizing your workplace, for the love of God, before you do anything, talk to a labor organizer, preferably the IWW. Today, I'm just going to be covering, the basics, intro level shit. And if you think you can be a hotshot organizer after just watching this, you are guaranteed to eat shit and die. So please talk to an organizer about your specific workplace first. Number two, don't say the U word on company property or lines of communication. Why do you think that is, Vosh? Why do you think we try and advise that?
Well, I think that sets alarm bells off in the ears of any managers who might be listening. I think it also, the simpier of workers, maybe people who are on good terms with the management, or people who just, for some misguided reason or another, are ideologically disinclined to join a union, libertarian types, or people who think that, the myth of meritocracy is real. I think that this might incline them to either publicly oppose you, which would be disastrous for early organizing efforts, or go directly to the management, who could either fire you, which is technically illegal, but they'll do it anyway. Or start, if you're like Amazon or whatever, they'll start having those cringy like workplace modules where it's like, here's Wally the warehouse to explain how union bosses want to take away all your money or some crap.
Yeah, the main thing I like to stress, and the reason why I love the IWW is that all of our tactics are just based on like practicality. They all serve a purpose, not just like some sort of ideological, reasoning. But the main practical reason is to basically not tip off the bosses. I like to think of it as, let's say you're trying to play like poker or 21, and you show your cards every single time. You don't want them to know what is coming. You want to make sure that when you do take action in your workplace, they do not expect it at all. Yeah, another third thing, another ground rule. I know there's plenty of people that I talk to when I talk about unions that they say, "Oh, that's nice, but it can never happen in your workplace." And Vosh, I kind of need your help with bullying your audience today.
Mm-hmm.
It is your workplace; you can do it. I don't want you to get into that mindset that it can't be your workplace. So, chat viewers, while you're watching this, make sure to think of your own workplace and how that works. But yeah, those are all the ground rules. I can kind of get into the timeline if you wish. Or do you have any questions about those ground rules?
Well, I just saw a question in chat that I'd like to throw over to you. To what extent does this and what we're going to talk about apply to contract workers?
Oh, so are you saying, sorry, can you describe that a bit?
Yeah,
Contract workers.
like I suppose people who are Uber drivers, DoorDash drivers, people who are not legally considered to be
Oh,
employees.
yeah. So I am a contract employee. I just wanted to make sure to get the specification. Yeah, so I'm a contract employee. And the most important thing that you need to understand in any union effort is that once you organize, you have leverage in any negotiation and any demand you want. And a common demand is to be employees and not contract workers. So let's say you're able to organize, your fellow Uber drivers, and you have enough of them. You have enough leverage. You have enough de facto power to make this demand. These skills I'm going to be teaching are broadly applicable. You and your coworkers are going to know what's best and how to apply them. They're not going to work for 100% of workplaces, but this is knowledge that's going to help any worker organize their workplace. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so no matter the specifics of any person's individual workplace, one thing is absolutely guaranteed, and that is that every worker can benefit from this knowledge. There is no hypothetical worker here or anywhere else who could in no way stand to listen to this.
Yeah. So I'm going to go a bit into the timeline for a union campaign. And this isn't going to be the same way that every IWW organizer explains it. This is just how I like to explain it. And I like to think of it as being in three phases. And these phases don't have like hard start and stops. They often bleed into one another. But the first phase is understanding your workplace. And that's kind of getting a lay of the land or a lay of your workplace before you take any sort of action or talk to your coworkers. And, I kind of like to think of it as, before you go out on a hike, you make sure you have a map so you don't get lost and die, or you make sure you have a recipe before you like bake or cook something. And you're just trying to largely understand how coworkers socially relate to one another, like what cliques there are, who looks up to who is influential, basic stuff like trying to get like a list of names and contacts going. Why do you think we advise, doing this first phase before, talking to others and taking action?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the exercise of creating a union, it's a one of political organizing. You're not doing it for a party, you're doing it for the workplace, but nonetheless, you're relying on an understanding of the social dynamics to maximize the outcomes of your organization. And whether that means going to a neighborhood and knowing what the demographics of it are and what issues they might respond to, or knowing which members of your workplace are discontented in which ways, which rhetoric they might respond to, it's all necessary. It's social work. Which is why I completely agree with you when you said earlier, if you go into this with no preparation, you're going to eat shit and die, because this is tough enough work that, people do it for a living. It's not really intuitive.
Yeah, and I don't want any workers who are listening to think that just because people do this for a living that, the individual workers on the ground can't do them. Like, I'm just a volunteer. I'm a fellow worker as well. But, doing this understanding your workplace steps, we want to make sure you're doing it as efficiently as possible. We want to make sure that, you aren't just kind of waffling about for a year or two, because I've heard plenty of workers just not know what the hell they're doing and kind of waste time. And again, I'm just giving a broad overview. I'm going to go back for specifics for each of these phases. But, going into the second phase, and this is where the majority of the work is talking to your coworkers and forming the committee. And basically what this means is you are talking to your coworkers outside of work, trying to learn, what their grievances are, what their knowledge is about unions and collective action in the workplace, and their fears of taking action. Everyone who's watching, I don't know if you have a notebook and pen in front of you, but if you do, if there's one thing you need to write down, you need to write down that direct and collective action gets the goods. Direct and collective action gets the goods.
Chat.
That's the main thing you're trying to teach your coworkers in these conversations. And you're ultimately trying to get them on board this effort. Do you have any questions about that? I'm going to go more into the specifics in a bit.
Yeah, so I completely agree with the direct action bit. I think that in many cases, people here are going to struggle with the specific rhetoric and trying to be appropriately sly about it. Again, it's like not saying the U word, right? You don't want to run in there and go like, sure does seem like these issues could be solved with some kind of collective labor organization, something like that. But I think that, and I'm a little while out from working, I guess what I would consider a proletarian job, so my memory might be a bit shaky here. But I remember complaining about the boss is like a central feature of the American workplace. It is non-stop. If you are with your coworkers in a non-work setting, or even often in a work setting but just away from management, complaints will flow non-stop from them, like a broken pipe. People are very willing to talk about that, I think, if they even remotely trust you, and people are very willing to have conversations about what could be done to make things better, I think. Though there is kind of like a innate built-up layer of disillusionment, I think, any possible improvement is just, a dream. There's no way that would actually work. And the difficulty, I think, is often breaking through that cynicism of making people feel like there are steps they can take.
Yeah, so one of the main things, kind of going back to your comment about, not saying the vocab, is in our trainings, we make sure that you do not use lefty jargon or language. I need everyone here to be completely cool and normal when talking to your coworkers. Do not say bourgeois, for the love of God. Say the owning class. Don't say proletariat. Say the working class. I like to say use the language without the vocab. And honestly, if you're a good organizer, you can organize a union effort without ever saying strike or union. Hey, wouldn't it be all cool if we just walked out one day? Like, what could they fucking do about that? And kind of going, sorry, what was your later point that you had just mentioned?
Oh, I think it's hard to break through that disillusionment a little bit.
Oh, yeah,
Sometimes people
yeah,
think,
yeah.
there's nothing that can be done, you know.
So the main thing we teach for in these conversations is to, move that discontent, that disillusionment into taking collective action. And I'm going to go more into the specifics in a bit. If we're moving on to this third phase, making your demands and direct action. And let's say you and your coworkers, there's quite a few of you now who are on board this effort. You're meeting regularly, and you have a good sense of what the grievances are and what demands you and your coworkers want to make. So our bread and butter that we teach workers is called a march on the boss. And again, quick disclaimer, do not do this without talking to a labor organizer first. You will eat shit and die. And what that means is just you and your coworkers just doing a march on the boss, making your demands, saying, if you do not do this at X, Y, and Z date, things will happen. I don't know if you can pull up that one GIF of that like super buff black guy just walking into a store. But
They're all envisioning it in their head right now.
it's basically like that, like a dozen or two of you just walking in onto the boss, making your demands. We're going to have 3-hour breaks and you're going to like it. But going a bit into direct action, I know that sounds a bit spooky and has a lot of baggage, but when it comes to the workplace, it's, the strikes, slowdowns, sick outs, walkouts, things of that nature. Ultimately, you're trying to fuck over profits. Because again, that's the main thing that your boss gives a shit about, is just having profit. And the only way to have leverage in any negotiation is to basically hold the bag and hold that profit hostage. Does that make sense overall?
Yeah,
Broad scope?
so. I think this actually ties into something that we were discussing earlier on stream. I don't know if you were watching it. We were talking about how very often the language of union and owner negotiations, it's framed like a civil conversation or negotiation, which it shouldn't be, because a civil conversation or negotiation does not assume oppositional thinking. It doesn't assume antagonism, which is exactly what is happening here. You and the owner have diametrically opposed interests, literally in opposite directions, and the owner has never consulted you for your negotiated opinion on any of his raises. I don't see why the opposite should be the case. You're not there to make friends. This is why businesses are so big on the we're all a big family vibe, right? Because they want you to think of your manager as like, we're all into this together. You're not. And for that reason, tactics that may feel underhanded or uncomfy, like being quiet about it, being sneaky, nefarious, gathering together all the other workers, then marching all on them at once, that may feel really mean or whatever, but, trust me, they didn't even think of marching to you when getting their pay bonus. You've never even factored into their plans. So given their, power differential, the only way to make you a part of their plans is to show up in force.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty mean if, many of the coworkers aren't paid enough to feed themselves or homeless. The main thing you're trying to do, if you hear any coworker talking like this, and I'm going to go back to this, is you're trying to agitate the fuck out of them. You're trying to make sure that their blood is moving, that they understand that, their shitty conditions are because of the bosses, not because of anything that the workers had done. But kind of going back to the general timeline. So, let's say you've done a couple of direct actions, you've won a couple of demands. And I think at that point, if your workers committee is meeting regularly, I think you have a fairly well-established union. You have a union presence at the workplace. And I know that at that point, you can kind of do with this body with whatever you want, whatever you democratically decide to do. And I know there's been a lot of hubbub about elections recently, and we can talk a bit more about that later on. But what we kind of advocate for is just doing direct action and gaining wins. But yeah, does that broadly make sense? Those three phases, understanding your workplace, forming the committee, talking to your coworkers, and then doing direct action and making demands.
I certainly think so. And I think I'm very glad that you stressed the necessity of avoiding Marxist terminology. I'm not to accuse people in chat who might default to that of being LARPy, because I think that we use the language we're accustomed to, and a lot of us are accustomed to online circles with, people who have literally like red capital or whatever. But this is just fundamentally unrelatable. And this is one of the reasons I think why this sort of like cosmopolitan online left agitation has generally been very disconnected from actual gains in unionization. And I think a large part of that is because very often we're obsessed with the aesthetic of being an anti-capitalist, when in reality, when socialism takes the United States, it will not be from people like us. It will be from people who don't know what capitalism or socialism means, but know damn well that they want to make the decisions at their workplace. It is about using the language that relates to people, and if you can't do that, you can't organize on any level. So that's like a fundamental skill that has to be respected.
Yeah, I mean, I like the IWW because it is ideologically vague. At the Phoenix branch, we have like an unofficial rule that if you talk about ideology, your kneecaps will just get busted with crowbars. So we try and avoid, just aiming all high and mighty and academic. We want to, relate to the working class as much as possible. But I was kind of hoping to go into the specifics, kind of going back to that first phase. Would you be able to pull MS Paint up?
I would be delighted to pull MS Paint up. One moment.
It's a surprise MS Paint stream.
I'm actually going to pull Clip Studio Paint up because that's what's on my on my hotbar.
Beautiful. While you're doing that, understanding your workplace, again, you're trying to get a lay of the land socially from your coworkers. And we kind of stress having three things. One of them is just having a contacts list. And what that is just a list of names, numbers, and their union support. Why do you think we stress just having a list of names and numbers?
Well, it's critical to know who's on your side. The ability to quickly contact people, to organize group chats. It's as with any organizing, bureaucracy is a part of maintaining awareness with a large number of people. You don't want it to just be a disorganized social club, because if that's the case, you can really quickly lose track of people and their opinions.
Exactly. You want to make sure you have as much support as possible. I know there was a wobbly union election, I believe at Jimmy John's, a couple of years ago, and they lost the vote by 2 votes. And it's 2 people that they kind of just forgot to talk to.
Tragic.
And so this list is just trying to make sure that you are talking to everyone. You also want to put down their union support. Have they verbally showed support for the union? Have they done something for the union? Are they verbally anti-union? Things of that nature. And, if you have a good context list, we try and make sure that the workers can point out what is called a social leader. What comes to mind when I bring up a social leader in a workplace?
Everard Clare? No. The social leader wouldn't be the most ideologically motivated. The social leader would be the person best capable of organizing. And that's not always the person who starts the process off.
Yeah, so I like to think of it as someone who's just influential. Someone that workers look to that isn't a supervisor, but is like extremely competent. Basically, everyone has experience, talking to a social leader. Everyone has a social leader in their workplace. It might even be you. But basically, it's someone that workers look to and could be influenced by. So the reason why I asked you to pull up MS Paint is another thing we like to do is do a social map. Do you know what a social map is?
I'm afraid I do not.
So a social map is kind of just like a physical, let's say, diagram of how the workers relate to one another. And you can kind of think of it as, making sure you have a trail map before you go out on a hike. So can you draw 2 groups of 3 circles for me?
Sure.
Maybe list them as Department A and Department B.
Ooh, we're really going to test my mouse painting skills here. Let's go.
I'm sorry. It's very critical. The revolution will happen due to your MS Paint streams.
All right, I got them.
All right, beautiful. So let's say, the beautiful viewers, you, the individual worker, are one of the circles on the left side, right? Let's say you're all buddy-buddy, you're all very close. But let's say you're all cashiers, and the other circles are working in merchandise. And you don't really talk to them, and they all speak Spanish. But none of you speak Spanish. And if you want to get a union effort going, you want to make sure that they're included. So if you could do me a favor and draw another circle away from those 2 groups.
Sure. I have drawn another circle.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's say, this worker is a janitor. He speaks both English and Spanish. So the best way of talking to, Department B is to make sure that you get that janitor on board. So he's best able to talk to everyone in Department B. Does this concept kind of make sense? Do you kind of see why we try and advocate for doing a
I
social
drew
map?
a sombrero on the hat with the Spanish speaking workers.
Oh, I meant that the singular circle was the Spanish speaker.
Yeah, this is
My
the
apologies.
this is the okay, so we talk to the janitor who's bilingual, and then the janitor
Yes.
talks, yes, like that.
Yeah. And then they talk to, yeah. So they talk to everyone who is a Spanish speaker, right? And we like to do social mapping as understanding the most efficient way of talking to your coworkers. So, a social leader, let's say one of the people in Department B in merchandising is a social leader. What you want to do is try and win their support first before the other workers in Department B. Why do you think that is?
Um, well, because you want to be able to work as a block as Group A. You don't want there to be divisions that can be exploited within your cell.
Yeah, so you want to get the social leader in Department B on first because you want to do this as efficiently as possible. If you get them on board, then they can talk to everyone in Department B. They're more likely to be trusted and understood by that social leader in Department B. Does that make sense? Sorry if
Yeah.
this is a bit
No, not at all.
complicated.
Well, this is actually like really applicable because I've talked before about how racism makes it much harder to unionize. Where in like inner city communities where there's a lot of multiracial, yeah, and they're in here, where there's a lot of like multiracial workplaces. Oftentimes, non-white people will want to unionize, but white people will either be racist or racially uncomfortable, or they'll be really vulnerable to being picked apart by management because it's easier to separate groups based on like ethnic lines rather than just purely, um, like talking to a single group and trying to separate them from their own unification. You need to be able to like make contacts with uh people capable of uniting the whole group because otherwise you have really significant weaknesses to exploit.
Yeah, so, this is kind of going into the second phase, but we're trying to make sure that the committee is as representative of the workplace as possible. And you want to make sure you include all groups, and you want to have a social leader from all groups if you can. And this is kind of going into the second phase of talking to your coworkers. But, these social leaders, those people that they are closest with, that they look up to, they're more likely to go into what is pissing them off, their grievances, their fears, when it comes to the workplace. Like, I know that like some of my female coworkers don't really like talking about, sexual assault that happens in the workplace to, male organizers, but they are more likely to with a woman who's on board the committee effort, things of that nature. So we're just trying to broadly make sure that we can understand the grievances and the demands of the workers as much as possible. So, kind of going a bit into talking to your coworkers. Number one, you want to make sure you are not doing this on company grounds at all. Why do you think that is?
Well, you're almost certainly being surveilled. Also, if they do try to fire you for exacerbating union activities, you don't want to give them the whole behavior on company grounds excuse. It's really difficult to fire people for this stuff if they've done it all off company ground.
Yeah, so the main thing I like to think of is because I've heard of other union organizers with different unions who weren't warned about not doing it on company grounds, and then they did it on company grounds and got it all on camera, and they were all fired for it. So we want to make sure you are not doing this on company grounds. And it also allows workers to feel more open, that they can, actually go into what is, making them anxious, what their problems are in the workplace. And, the most important part of this phase is being social. Now, I know everyone has a bit of, social anxiety when it comes to talking to anyone, but I need you to be social. I'm not really asking you to not be afraid. I'm asking you to be brave and talk to your coworkers. And the best way of doing this, the best way, at least personally, that I found, in talking to coworkers outside of work is offering them rides. There's definitely one of your coworkers who does not have a car and would like a ride. And, I've offered plenty of rides where, they go into like the shit that is eating them up at work. And kind of going into kind of tying back to the social, the contacts list and getting numbers. One good way of getting numbers is at the end saying, hey, if you ever need a ride again, feel free to, here's my number. Feel free to contact me if you need a ride to work at any point. Do you have any experiences with like getting phone numbers from coworkers at work?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with the rides thing. Usually it's small favors offered. People don't tend to have significant social circles that far outside of work. Sometimes they do, but people spend a lot of time at work, you know? So if I feel like in casual conversation, it's pretty easy to find excuses to get to know people better. Usually people think of this as like a dating thing or whatever, but yeah, no, like dropping people off after work is a big one if you have a car and they don't, or even offering to do like some kind of favor, asking about how they've been. I think that like for the most part, people want more friends. Some people are so busy they won't even care for it, but like I think realistically, if we're talking about your average like wage cage job, most of the people there are probably in a state where they could do for a little more social interaction, positive social interaction.
Yeah, talk to your coworkers. God damn it, that's the main thing I advise today is talk to your coworkers. Another good way of just getting your coworkers' numbers is just saying, "Hey, can I get your number if I need a shift covered at any point, or I can cover your shift at any point?" At least me, I just ask coworkers their numbers without like precondition. But maybe that's just my autistic riz that allows it.
Many people
But
in
you want to
chat
make
have
sure.
autistic riz as well. Don't worry, it's applicable.
All right, all right. You got to make sure you use that, for the union effort. So, let's say you have, a coworker's number, and you ask them to meet outside of work, and you want to make sure that they understand that it is talking about work, and not like anything else, because there's like nothing that kind of kills the vibe more thinking you're going to hang out with a friend, and then you're talking about like the most heavy shit at work. So when you ask your coworkers to meet outside of work, make sure that they know it is about work. And once you kind of talk to them, we have this model called AIOU. And what that is, and the first three letters are the only ones that are important for this. It is agitate, educate, and inoculate. And it is kind of a general timeline or model we follow when talking to our coworkers. Do you have any knowledge about AEI or what that means?
None at all.
So, A, agitate. We start off with that. We're trying to get the blood flowing. We're trying to understand what their grievances are. Why do you think we start with that first?
Well, you don't know how to convince them if you don't know what they're upset about. Different people are going to be affected, by different stuff. Older people or people with disabilities might be disproportionately affected by stuff like cashiers can't sit down. Or younger and more sprightly people might be more upset with like inconsistent scheduling. Like it varies tremendously. You got to know what people are on about.
Yeah, you're trying to understand like what is going to motivate them to move, to take action. You need to understand like what is deeply eating at them. And, we kind of start with this not just to piss them off, but to kind of lead to E, which is educate. And again, that's going back to that main lesson of direct and collective action gets the goods. And you're trying to transition into E, so you can kind of, after agitating them, after getting their blood flowing, you want to lead them towards the correct conclusion. You're trying to make sure that they understand that, it's not just an individual effort, like going to HR to fix something. It is not, a government or union bureaucrat going to fix it, that it is the workers themselves, bottom up, who are going to fix it. So during this E section, we kind of like to get a feeling of, what experience do they have with unions, if it's brought up at all, or how they think the solutions can be done. Also, just to kind of rewind a bit, I kind of, missed over some important topics when it comes to these one-on-ones. Main thing you're trying to do is the 20-80 rule. And I know that is like a thing in like business, but in terms of this, you are trying to do 20% of the talking while they're doing 80% of the talking. And while you are talking for your 20%, you're trying to do leading questions. You're not trying to give the conclusion to them. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we advise that?
Well, because you don't want to come across as preachy or like you're browbeating them. Whether they immediately catch on to what you're going on about or whether they don't and are just talking, you want the conversation to feel like it's being led by them, especially since you're trying to figure out what they feel. So you don't want to come across as though you're telling them how they feel, and people will almost immediately check out of any one of these proposals if the vibe that's being given is this like young ideologue has sudden new bright idea on how to fix everything. Let me just tell you how it works. People are just naturally resistant to that kind of advocacy for good reason, because it's usually like that's like tech industry crap. It's if you care about the working people, you have to listen to their concerns.
Yeah, like any effort and buy-in to an effort is going to more come if they feel like they contributed to it, if they have like actively participated into it. The effort is going to be a lot weaker if it's just that young ideologue who's coming in saying, all right, we're going to do a union, we're going to march on the boss. Whatever you think, nah, nada. So we want to make sure that they are coming to the conclusions. We want to make sure that we aren't just spoon feeding it to them. And you kind of ask questions that kind of, gets them and leads them to that direction. So, like a simple question you could ask is like, what do you think they would do if we all just like walked out on the job one day? Do you think they would listen to us? Or, how do you think it would go if instead of you individually asking the boss for a raise, we all ask the boss for a raise? Stuff like that. You're trying to not like say it's going to be better. You're trying to come up with a conclusion, have them come up with a conclusion. And then, that's E. And then you try and go to inoculate.
I have a question about E, by the way.
Go ahead.
Well, right now we're seeing a whole lot of media attention being directed towards all this pro-union stuff. UAW, SAG-AFTRA, the upcoming like airline host strike. There's like a ton of stuff going on that most people, I think, are going to catch some wind of. At what point do you think it's appropriate to start using the U word? Once you've gotten people a little on board, to point out and go like, hey, so we have all these issues, and I can't help but notice that there are 50 million stories in the papers about all these gains that have been got through unionization. Do you think maybe we give that a little shot? Like, at what point do you think it's appropriate to start being more overt because precedent establishes, the justification?
Yeah, so if you're talking to your coworkers outside of work, they're not dumb. They're going to understand a bit of what is up. They might not know that it is about unions specifically, but they're going to know you want to do something. And I'm still learning this from my own experience with organizing my workplace. I used to kind of do it on the first meeting, but I advise not to do it on the first meeting. Try and do it like on the second or third, even if they do bring up unions or that they want a union. And we try and make sure that you get the blood flowing a little bit. They understand what the solutions are, or they come to their own conclusions about what the solutions are first before saying, hey, this is a union effort going on. And I kind of do this mainly because the U word has a lot of baggage to it. They might think that it's like a whole bureaucratic thing that's going to lead to like a bunch of conflict and lost wages. What you are trying to do is make sure that they understand the importance of them and their coworkers taking action first before, attaching that important label of union. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, 100%. It's certainly it gets easier, I think, the more public the victories of unions are, because when you get into mentioning it specifically, then you have more examples that you can point to, that that prove the value.
Yeah. You want to make sure you're pointing to other workers. Like you could say, hey, did you see what the Teamsters workers did and how they got a raise from it? Things of that nature. Point to other examples of what other similar workers have done. But just for like the sake of time, do you mind moving on?
Oh, no, go right ahead.
So I inoculate. So think of it kind of like a vaccine, and you're trying to address the fear that they have when it comes to taking action in the workplace. You kind of want to introduce a bit of fear in order to address their overall fear of taking action. So the most common fear of taking action is, of course, being retaliated, losing their job, having cut hours, things of that nature. And you do not want to just skim it or gloss over it or act like it doesn't exist. Because, if this ball does get rolling at your workplace, there will be retaliation. I don't want anyone to think that there won't be. I know it's illegal, but the bosses are rich and they don't give a shit. So you want to make sure you address that fear. And you don't do it by saying, well, I'm a brave organizer. Let's be gung ho about it. You want to talk about, your own fears of taking action. Like, oh, I'm also afraid of, not being able to pay rent or feeding my kids, things of that nature. But you don't want to end on inoculate. You try and go back to agitating them, because there's not more of a bummer than just ending on the saddest note. You want to make sure that you are kind of agitating them again after addressing these fears. I think my favorite question I like to ask is here's the cost of doing something, but what is the cost of doing nothing? Are you going to be able to afford your rent at this rate in 2 to 3 years? Here in Phoenix, we had I think the highest inflation in the nation for the vast majority of the past 2 years. And you try and make sure that they understand that there are bigger costs in doing nothing than of taking action. Does that make sense? I kind of quickly went through it.
No, yeah, completely. I mean, you have there have been so many instances of, well, not pay cuts, usually a lack of pay rises, inflation skyrocketing, rent increasing, and mass layoffs too. And it's people are innately more afraid of action than they are of inaction, because action demands, well, it demands action. It demands direct engagement from them. And, it always feels worse, I think, or people get more nervous about a choice leading to bad outcomes than a lack of one, because then they don't feel like they're taking ownership over the consequences of that. But of course you are. In reality, if you choose not to make a decision, that was the decision. And I agree completely that you want to stay away from the brave organizer rhetoric, well, I would rather die a free man than live a slave, all that bullshit, because that comes across as LARPing. You've got people trying to feed their kids there. That's not going to sell people on your ideology or on your plan. And I think that it's to your benefit to not emphasize unionization as a dangerous or harmful or risky practice, though it is to some extent, of course, though no more so than not doing anything. Certainly, I think far less so than not doing anything. You don't want to play that as some kind of heroic sacrifice or whatever, because that's dumb. That doesn't do it.
Yeah, you don't want to make it seem like this effort is unnecessary and dangerous. You want to make it seem like you're not wanting this personally, that you and your coworkers are forced to take action because this is unsustainable. Yeah. So, let's say you kind of talked to a lot of your coworkers, you kind of agitated them, you educated them, you inoculated them, and you're ultimately trying to get them on board this effort. And what that means is having a workers' committee. And I know that sounds very prestigious, but it's literally just you and your coworkers meeting regularly. And what you're trying to do is just still figure out who you need to talk to. Because this effort, if it's just done by one individual, is never going to happen. You need to make sure that they have a well-run committee of social leaders, making sure that they are talking to as many people as possible. And I know this comes up a bit about what is the amount of workers you need to feel comfortable to take action. And you don't need the vast majority. Oftentimes union efforts start as a minority. And any actions you can take still have very considerable weight in a workplace, even if it's still a minority of workers. And, once you're starting off, you're not going to have a buy-in from a whole lot of people. You're going to have a whole lot of fence sitters. They're not going to see the importance and need for a union. But let's say you and your committee start with, smaller direct actions, and then you kind of ramp up. Why do you think we try and advocate for starting with smaller direct actions before, something like the big sexy strike?
Well, you want people to feel confident in your ability to succeed. You want to rack up a couple of wins before you start asking people to commit towards larger, riskier, more committed projects. You also want to scare management. I think that management could probably, I'd say probably rightfully so, could look at something like just out of nowhere advocacy for a strike and go like, you crazy kids, not take it very seriously, because usually that stuff is predicated by a lot of on the ground action. And you want to make it clear to them that you mean business. You're taking it very seriously.
Yeah, like if you're trying to go for like the big sexy strike right away, you are not prepared. Like all of this comes from like practical on-hand knowledge that you get from taking direct action. And to give a couple of examples, something small and like one of my favorite stories is a textile mill, I think somewhere on the East Coast. They had a manager there that was, sexually assaulting a lot of the, women there.
Mm-hmm.
And what they decided to do is have all of them wear whistles around their neck. And every time that they came by or tried to come up close, they would just all blow the whistle, or that specific woman would blow the whistle to alert everyone that manager is nearby.
Whew.
That is a direct action.
Yeah, that's aggressive. Jesus.
Yeah, or another one that I heard from a fellow worker is that there was a bully manager who just liked to, dog on like a couple of workers. And what the coworkers there decided to do is every time he got close to one of them and say something, they would all pull out notebooks or their phones and start just like writing it down. Things of that nature. I don't want everyone to think that the strike or the march on the boss is the only thing to fix some problems. There's plenty of smaller shit that you can do to rack up a couple of wins. And ultimately, you get more buy-in from those coworkers who are on the fence if they see changes in the workplace. Oh, that asshole manager is not like really talking down to us anymore. They're more likely to join the effort. At least personally, in my job, we have clients that come in and kind of act like our supervisors for that day. And a lot of them are complete dicks. And, I've never in that time heard an apology, or from any of the people that have been there longer have heard an apology. And one day we got yelled at for like the most minor bullshit that wasn't even our fault. It was their fault. And afterwards, me and another fellow worker who's in the union effort gathered everyone together that was yelled at and who was witness to it, and basically like marched to the other clients and say, we're not going to work with him if he doesn't apologize. And 2 hours later, he kind of came back and apologized to us. That was like the first apology we had ever heard from a client. And it was so beautiful. And I had like two coworkers come up to me kind of after that I'd already done a one-on-one with, but they were a bit iffy, saying they want to help the effort now. So you're ultimately trying to ramp up. You're ultimately trying to make sure that your committee has more and more experience, and you're ultimately trying to get more and more buy-in from your coworkers. And at that point, you and your coworkers can decide what to do with this union effort. I know that elections have kind of been at the news recently. Do you want to talk about that in union elections?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it's very inspiring to see so much work like that being done and such obvious, visible successes. We looked at the UAW stuff earlier, and that is coming across like downright overt class warfare. Presumably, of course, because the circumstances of the UAW workers are such that that kind of rhetoric is affected with them. This like overt class warfare shit. Which is nice. I mean, obviously, given in line with my ideology, unions are just one step in a larger social battle against inequitable ownership and political control. So seeing people who have agitated to the point that they can take that next step is very inspiring. But on a fundamental level, right? Like 97% of UAW workers voted for a strike. Sean Fine, it was, I think. Sean something.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the people who voted him in as UAW president, they're not all like Marxists or anything. They're just people who have become legitimately sympathetic to the rhetoric that he's offering because their experiences with the auto industry has left them feeling so in need of a solution.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of more talking about, union authorization elections rather than, strike votes.
Ah, like all the Starbucks stuff.
Yeah. So, I know there's been quite a few NLRB changes recently when it comes to elections.
Oh, yeah.
I watched your stream the other day when you were talking about it, how important it is. And one thing caught my eye in your video. It's the article you read. There's a sentence in it that says, this is not going to make organizing easier necessarily, but it will make union elections easier. And I want to stress that the vast majority of this work is organizing the shop floor, talking to your coworkers, making sure you have a solid base of support. Mainly because if you do the union election and go for the contract route, your contract is only as good as how much leverage you have in the negotiation. I don't want anyone here to think that just getting an election is going to change the workplace. It's just a written word. The only way to make sure that the written word is backed up and it's powerful is through organizing the shop floor. So if you do decide to go the election route, you need to make sure that you are organizing first and getting a couple of wins first. And I like to stress that mainly because you will be retaliated against. Like I know other organizers in business unions, and I'll go more into that in a bit, who were not prepared for retaliation. They had the election, and then they were immediately retaliated against, fired or changed positions, so they weren't talking to each other anymore. The only way to help prepare you and your coworkers for any retaliation is to make sure that you have a well-run committee that is able to take action. So let's say one of your coworkers are fired and retaliated against for the union effort. Well, if you have a well-run committee who has done direct action before, then you can go out and strike in protest instead of just being like, well, shucks. Does that kind of largely make sense why we stress direct action a bunch over just having an election?
And I think it's also worth remembering, of course, that despite everything being skewed in their favor, the bourgeoisie have to exhibit constant effort.
The owning class.
The owning class, right, have to exhibit constant effort in order to maintain their control in the workplace. They don't sit on their laurels. Even with all the rules skewed in their favor, they still have to manually break up unionizing efforts. They have to move people around. They don't sleep. So, of course, nor can we. There's never a point where we get to kick our feet up and go, well, we got that law. We got that, union vote. We're fine now. Until, God willing, they are the owning class. It's always going to be an uphill battle. But it can be made easier.
Yeah, like my big worry, and I love this upsurge in labor activity, is that it's all just going to lead to only elections. And that's my fear because, that doesn't have workshop or workplace organizing. It's really just having a union in name without changing much or changing any of the dynamics, having more control over your life or living in basic decency. I used to be an overnight stalker at Fry's grocery store here. And I was unionized under UFCW, and we had a contract at a union workplace. But me and all of my coworkers were making minimum wage, and were struggling to feed ourselves and our families. So I don't want the viewers to think that just getting the election, the contract is the end all be all goal. The end all be all goal is to change your workplace for the better, to make sure that you and your coworkers are taking action, and you and your coworkers are having some medium of control over your lives and not just directed by the owning class. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I fully agree. There have been some successes, but with Starbucks in particular, you're right. I have seen a lot of union votes winning. I don't know how many concessions that I've seen. Maybe more media attention is being given to the votes themselves, or maybe it takes more time, but hopefully people don't get complacent at that point, because you're completely correct. Having a union that doesn't actually use their power it's completely aesthetic. It doesn't meaningfully change the relationship between the worker and the business they work at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm just trying to, shit on Starbucks or Amazon Labor Union for just doing the election. I've actually seen quite a bit of news about Starbucks going out on strike, and I love that. I advocate for that. I want to make sure that any and all unions, whether it's the more established unions or the ones that are just popping up, are doing direct action and are organizing the shop floor. Unions in name, that aren't organizing like UFCW, don't really change anything for the working class. My biggest fear is that all this labor agitation is going to be funneled into those bodies that ultimately do nothing. And I want to make sure that every worker is trained in this organizing, have a bottom-up system so we could eventually form the one big union.
That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about what's happening with the UAW right now, because they're being so militant in organizing. You know, they've been so aggressive with it. Like they weren't content to rest on their laurels. And it's a lot of it, so much is capitalist realism, right? Like a lot of it is what people think is possible. So for them to see these successes in unionization, in the actions taken afterwards, um, it can only inspire more people to do so. As long as it's handled well, which, you know, hopefully with IWW guidance as appropriate, it can be. Um, we might be able to see this turn into something socially meaningful.
Yeah. Before we kind of end, I don't know how much time I have. Do you want to have chat ask any questions for me so I can answer?
Sure, chat, run them up. I'll be the one. Or would you like to filter the questions? Just look at them directly, or would you like me to throw them at you?
You are trained in this art form, so I would prefer you.
All right, chat, give it a go. Don't be annoying. One of
Quick
them
question:
says,
what was like the last real job, let's say, that you had?
I worked in between semesters at university when I went back to see my folks in Los Angeles. I worked at the same frozen yogurt place that I had worked at prior to leaving for university. I got the job again for a couple of months. Um, so there was that, and prior to that, I was a security guard at a Ross, and I was just a restaurant server. Nothing too glamorous.
Hey, that's the working class, not being glamorous. Is there anything you would change at that yoga place? Could be the smallest thing.
Yeah, there were a lot of problems with it, though they weren't well, they were management's fault. They weren't my manager's fault because my manager had basically no control over the place. He just controlled one of like a couple of locations, and he had like a guidebook or whatever. He was nice. However, yeah, there were some pretty serious issues. I think a large part of it is that despite being on Beverly Drive, there wasn't really any opportunity or incentive for the workers there to make anything unique out of the location. And considering there were only like two or three of that specific brand of yogurt places, it could have been a kind of like local boutique place. I mean, certainly the people traveling through the area had the income to afford, I guess, a higher class experience, but it was totally unfit for the location because it might as well have been going into like like Cold Stone Creamery being like the nicer one. It might as well have been like a Baskin Robbins on Rodeo Drive. It was just a total waste of space, and it went under accordingly. Though we did frequently have who was the celebrity guest thing? It's this guy who's been canceled for rape allegations, so it's probably not the biggest thing to brag about. But he was the '80s porn. Ron Jeremy. Ron Jeremy used to come by pretty often. Total asshole.
Yeah. So one demand you could have is to make sure Ron Jeremy is not allowed in your workplace.
Oh yeah,
Um,
certainly.
have you caught any questions from chat?
Oh yeah, certainly. So scrolling up past the point where they're making fun of me for my froyo stuff. Is it harder or easier to unionize a government job?
I mean, it's a bit different. It's going to be particular to your workplace. I mean, over the past 50 years, the general downtrend in unionization rates have been almost completely from the private sector. And most of the union gains have been won in the public sector. Of course, the negotiating is not just a boss or management, but it is also the government. But again, I want you to focus on like those small demands and wins you can get in the beginning. There's probably some minute shit at your office or at your job that could be changed. That doesn't require lobbying your legislator or Congress.
I have made some of the mistakes that you detailed in your opening bit, but I still want to unionize my workplace. Should I continue to try, or is it over?
So just because I don't really know the particulars, I think you should still try. Just be aware of that it might come up. And again, you're trying to do this as secretly as possible, right? If you're doing a good job, the boss isn't going to know that you're connected to the current effort, if anything. And the main thing we stress is to make sure that there aren't outliers and leaders in this effort. We want to make sure that it's as evenly distributed amongst the workers as possible. Because if you just have one gung-ho guy, leading this effort, the boss can just fire them, and then that union effort is basically beheaded. But let's say you and all of your coworkers, are marching in and all of you are talking, all of you are making demands, they can't fire all of you. They can't just fire one to cut the effort. At that point, it is the workplace, it is the workers. So even if you made some of these, mistakes, I think you should still try at least. It is your livelihood on the line. I think you should try and have some control over it. But ultimately, talk to a labor organizer, specifically the IWW.
Do you
But yeah,
do you have any suggestions for unionizing in workplaces where the majority of the workers are high turnover, like high school employees or something to that effect?
yeah. So like at my job, there's a massive turnover. So I understand, this fear. And what you want to do is, I talked about social leaders in the beginning. There are going to be vets at any place who have been there for like a year or two, who know the ins and outs. And you want to make sure that they are on board, because ultimately having them on board is going to help, any high turnover with teenagers workplace still lead to direct action.
Um, can you unionize a company that contracts out to multiple sites? Like, could you unionize a specific site if you're kept separate, or would you have to make an effort to unionize broadly?
I mean, we advocate for wall to wall organizing. So in this case, let's say it's more metaphorical than literal, of like multiple sites. It depends what you and your coworkers decide to have the boundaries of your local be. I mean, of course, we advocate for the one big union, all of you in one union, and you have more effective power in that way. But yeah, I say, try to unionize all of the sites. And one of the reasons why I try and not advocate for going the formal union election route is there are going to be a bunch of disputes about the local boundaries and who's included in this effort and who isn't, and they're often skewed towards bad union election results. So what I like about just organic organizing is that you and your coworkers can decide what the boundary is.
Do you have any suggestions for how to improve the UFCW for all the grocery workers out there?
Oh, there's plenty of reform efforts going on in the big established unions. There are probably some UFCW locals that are better, but mine was particularly awful. What I would genuinely just advocate for, and is just organizing like the union isn't there. So, the
Oh, that's
IWW
interesting.
has, yeah, so we do something called dual card campaigns. So what that means is that you're a card carrying member for one union and the IWW. And what we advocate for is just acting like the union isn't there, or treating them like they are the boss. Because many unions are basically just hiring halls in the same sense that companies are. And let's say your union does not allow or has a no strike clause, and your workplace is still like shitty. Like it's, Phoenix summers are literal hell on earth, and warehouses are, just hot boxes basically. And if your union isn't fucking doing anything to fix that, just have you and your coworkers organize like the union isn't there. Ultimately, bottom up approaches to you and your coworkers organizing is the most effective way for changing your workplace, rather than trying to reform a top heavy bureaucratic system.
Yeah, do you think that'd be difficult because people would go like, "Well, what do you mean union? We already have a union." Then they point to like the piece of crap they've been stuck with.
Yeah, that's why I advocate for, speaking the language without the vocab. Like, there's all that baggage with the U word. But if you just say, hey, all of us should, march on the boss or come together to tell the boss what, that is still basically doing the actions of unions without saying it. Ultimately, I think that's one way, but you should still say, well, they aren't doing anything about it. It's, we need to take it into our own hands to fix this problem, whether they're here or not.
I think that's an interesting suggestion. Yeah, sometimes it feels like these gigantic sectoral unions that do nothing are a kind of controlled opposition, where there's all the pomp and circumstance of union rep, but in reality they do basically nothing for you. And that would probably make it in many cases harder because then people already have kind of a dampened view of what unions can do for them. I like that, using the don't say the U word approach as a kind of catch-all way of managing that.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the main lesson I want to teach, and I want literally all viewers to take, and I'm talking to you specifically, individually, the chatter or viewer, is that it is up to you and your coworkers to fix this. It is not going to be fixed by, union or government bureaucrats stepping in. Joe Biden's America is going to make CEOs illegal.
Mhm.
Ultimately, if you want to make CEOs illegal, it is going to be up to you and your coworkers changing your workplace conditions.
Inshallah.
But yeah, I believe that's it about for everything I was hoping to cover. Do you have anything else for me?
If you have a little bit more time, I would be happy to field more questions from chat.
Yeah, go for it. I just wasn't sure if you had like a time restriction or anything.
We covered a lot before you came on. I was satisfied with a lot of that coverage. This has been a very pro-union stream. I'm very happy with it. Chat, continue. There were people in chat asking about unionizing and coding jobs. That's pretty vague. What I'm guessing they're asking is that in Silicon Valley or tech jobs generally, if you're familiar with anything that could be adapted to the culture of that environment.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of Silicon Valley culture.
It's not good.
Yeah, like the only thing that comes up is like everyone thinking they're an entrepreneur or some shit. But going back to coding, like let's say you're trying to organize a place full of coders. I assume a lot of you are remote workers. And I think genuinely one of the best benefits of the IWWs, we also help train for remote workers and how to organize that. I'm not personally experienced with that, but
That's actually a great point. Yeah.
there's a couple of fellow workers here in Phoenix that are more knowledgeable about it. So I can't really go more into the specifics I don't personally know. But if you have any questions related to like remote working or organizing in you can email us at phoenix@iww.org
That's an
for any
excellent,
specific questions.
yeah, stuff specific to remote worker organizing. That's an interesting one. I hadn't even thought about that. That's got to have its own set of challenges. Um,
Yeah, but I assume coders have like a lot of leverage. Like you literally control the website in your hands. Like a lot of the managers or coders that might come in to be strike breakers aren't going to be able to read the code or know it as in and out as the coders themselves. You have a lot of leverage in your hand that I don't think coders are aware of.
yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate their leverage in general because they're so oversold on the idea of worker replaceability. You know, a lot of workers are replaceable, some of them very much so, but even the most replaceable workers, they usually can't field new people in for a while. Like the whole process of putting out petitions and employment and such, I mean, it all takes time. And even if you think like, oh, they could replace me in a day or whatever, well, no. And the inconvenience of you not doing your job for even a couple of weeks on your own, that would be significant. You with the rest of your workplace, like 20 people at a grocery store. I mean, could all of you be replaced individually given enough time? Yeah, maybe sure, yeah. But how much would it cost the boss to have to do that on the fly, right?
Yeah, I mean, I want everyone to think of union efforts as how to get leverage in a negotiation. Like, you're not just here to like slap a banner at your workplace. You're trying to think of it as how do we get the most leverage and fuck over the boss the most to get our demands. And of course, the number one way is screwing over profits. And you might think you're replaceable, but as you just said, replacing people, retraining people takes a lot of time. And I think everyone has seen like small business owners complaining about like no one wants to work anymore, and that's mainly because they have shitty workplace conditions. It's difficult to replace people. So I don't want anyone to think that just because their job is let's say in flux in terms of security or that has high turnover rate that you don't have leverage in this.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think a lot of this is like very deliberate myth making. The idea that, like, oh, wow, strike? How could you ever manage to do that when, you're so replaceable? I think a lot of this is like snakish disinfo designed to keep people complacent or at the very least, to keep them discouraged. Um, I, uh, uh, One person is asking about unions and employee owned companies. I imagine the answer to that would be very similar to the one previous. which is you treat it as though the union's not there. Well, you treat it as though the employee ownership is not there, correct?
So I assume that's kind of about co-ops. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I think they said they had, what was it, an ESOP program? I don't know if it's proper employee ownership like a worker co-op, more like profit sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what that is referring to. Again, like if you have issues at your workplace that you and your coworkers want to change, organize to fix it. I mean, that's like the most baseline advice I can give. Like, even if it is worker owned and you have problems with it, you still organize to fix them.
Yeah, I agree completely. Let me see really quickly.
I assume like chatters, if you have any questions about like social anxiety and talking to your coworkers, feel free to ask them because most union efforts die in that second phase of trying to build the committee and talking to your coworkers. So if you have any specific questions about talking to your coworkers, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, we've talked about autistic Riz quite a lot, and chat. It's eventually, it's put up or shut up. Okay, you're going to Riz your way into an equitable and considerate workplace. This is the time. This is the chance. Yeah, the social stuff is, I like you said, that's where most of it dies. I think that's where most people are going to struggle, not just because of the demographics of the community to which you're currently speaking, but also because it's just difficult to get people motivated um, in a time of so much disillusionment. I think people are just trend towards cynicism right now. And sometimes people turn that
That's
to anger in a constructive way, and sometimes they just kind of,
Yeah, that's why we try and advocate for the AIOU model. If they're disillusioned, you got to get their blood moving. You got to agitate them, and you want to make sure it's not just leading to a bunch of cynicism or they're just angry and don't know what to do. Because I feel like that's a lot of the coverage when it comes to how shitty the world is. It just says how shitty the world is without like how to change it. Or I know a lot of people say, well, just organize, and then are not given any instruction. So you want to make sure that your workers, that your fellow workers aren't just like disillusioned, but that they're a bit angry and know that collective and direct action gets the goods. I can talk a bit about like my personal
sure.
experience,
I see
if
one
you don't
person
mind.
in chat I want to respond to super quick. Then yes, right ahead. Someone was asking for terms to use instead of bourgeoisie, which is a phenomenal question for my chat. And I just want to say, in my experience, no matter what the workplace is, you can say the management, and that will work fine. That is an almost universal term, which carries with it so much disdain for the average working person.
Yeah, like management is completely fine. Like that's mainly the vocab I like to use, like most day in day out. I just prefer, let's say broad scope wise. I just like to say the owning class. Some wobblies like to say the employing class, mainly because bourgeoisie just sounds, let's say, abstract. Like people, like it's not inherent of what it means. And I like the owning class because it's just like, oh, they own our workplace, our homes, the lands. It's pretty intuitive.
Yeah, you don't want to come across like a wannabe 19th century revolutionary. Um, whatever language that people, I mean, if it's mostly a blue workplace, right, where people kind of, everyone's chewing tobacco and spitting it into comically large and like loud copper pots right next to them. I don't know, like the management, de bois. Just yeah, stray away from the language you see on Twitter. I think. Don't call anyone comrade. Yeah, you guys can do it. I believe in you. Okay, I believe in you. Sorry, but yeah, tell us about your experience, please.
Yeah, so talking about like social anxiety and just talking to your coworkers, I personally used to be just a complete mess socially. Like I could not, talk to people and like look them in the eye like a couple of years ago. Um, and I think like one of the main things that motivated me to like literally put up or shut up because I was reading a bunch and about labor history and the history of the left in general. And I remember one night at dinner with my parents. Love them, by the way. I don't want anyone to get a bad impression of them. But one time at dinner, we were talking about climate change and all of the effects that are going to come from it. And we were talking about solutions, and I forget exactly what, but they gave very milk toast responses, or didn't really register like the gravity of the situation. And like in my head, I just thought, like what did you and your generation do to stop this? And instead of being like a loser son and like yelling that at them, I had this terrifying thought of like, what am I going to say to like some punk kid in like 2035 or 2040? Like, what did you do to stop this? Like, all of the effects of climate change, uh, you know, uh, the rights of workers being more diminished. And I couldn't stomach that feeling of saying I didn't do anything because I was too nervous to talk to people. Like, I want everyone to understand, all of the viewers, that it is ultimately up to you and your coworkers. And ultimately, you have to be social. Again, I'm not asking you to like not be fearful. I'm asking you to be brave. And the best way of becoming social and learning is through direct experience of putting yourself out there and learning how to communicate properly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that to a large extent, the collective NLM or alienation that people have experienced to an increasing extent over the past few decades has been both a byproduct and cause of decreasing worker and union representation. The more people think of workplaces in a sort of gig economy contract worker fashion, you get thrown in there. You never know your hours. You don't know anyone you're working with. People get turned over every 3 months. There's no social gain there. There's nothing to latch onto, nothing to feel good about. And as a consequence of that, it is, obviously people feel terrible, but also it makes it really, 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 really difficult to organize. But I think that the workplace, right now, your boss may not be your family, but your workplace should feel like a part of your home. I think it should be a place where you have a degree of control and social investment that makes it feel like your space, at least to some extent. We can't have everyone at a factory line, doiling up their own machine, or maybe we can. I don't know, but something like that. And I think that with that attitude, that's something that has to be worked towards. And if that means learning how to riz people up on the path towards unionization, then consider your efforts to become more social both a personal and a political act. Because I certainly think that is the case. I think that the powers that be benefit from your social incompetence.
Yeah, I mean, the owning class is trying to atomize the workers, trying to make sure that they aren't talking. Like, just getting your coworker's number is a political act, is a social act. And ultimately, again, you want to make sure that you and your coworkers have control over your lives. Again, no one likes the, uncertainty of like whether they're going to be able to pay rent in a couple of months, that your livelihood and your ability to have a home and feed yourself are just held by oftentimes a singular person. I do this so I can have some certainty in my life. And I want to make sure that everyone has some like bit of control over their lives. And, you talking to your coworkers is how you control your life, is how we, the working class, get what we want. The New Deal era between like the 1930s and 70s, all of the massive gains that came out from that, standard of living doubling for the working class came about from the unions, came about from them deciding to go out on strike against their bosses. The reason why we have, the weekend, why we had some control over child labor laws is from the unions going out on strike, making sure that the average worker is talking to one another. I need everyone here, everyone that is viewing this, to talk to their coworkers.
No, I agree completely. And it'll make you happier too, frankly. You all could benefit, I think, from going outside a little more often than you do, in my personal opinion. I see how chat talks to each other. You could do for it a little. So it's a benefit for everyone, really, including your workplaces. Man, I really appreciate you coming on to talk. I think we've covered some really important ground here, and I hope you know that you are very welcome to come on again in the future. Um, in case there are developments or you want to expand on anything specific. But I would encourage people watching to remember, as fun as it is to get all your political information disseminated entirely through the funny man stream, you know, the IWW is not a guy talking to me. It's an organization with many workers and people who do outreach. So, yeah, if you have
Yeah, just
questions, go.
Yeah, I was just going to say before we end this, just got to promote the
Mhm.
industrial workers of the world, IWW. If you're interested in joining and getting trained, go to iww.org and sign up there. If you are in the Phoenix area, And oh, everyone, post frogs if you're in the greater metropolitan Phoenix area.
I'm
If you're
sorry
in
to
the
those
Phoenix
people.
area, sorry, what'd you say?
I'm sorry to those people. I apologize.
Oh, I mean, I could talk about Phoenix forever, but if you're in the Phoenix area, contact Phoenix branch of the IWW, Phoenix at IWW dot, sorry, Phoenix at Gmail. Wait, no, hold on. Sorry, I'm forgetting my own Gmail right now. I said it earlier.
I do it all the
Uh,
time.
Phoenix at IWW.org. Or you could follow us on our socials at IWWPHX. Feel free to reach out if you are interested in organizing. Most likely, if you reach out to the Phoenix branch, you'll meet me.
Fantastic. Well, chat, you better act on that. You know, I expect you guys to take this seriously. If you really care about improving your workplaces, you know, it's not just about stopping by for a stream. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having us on. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.